sister's a therapist and I tell jokes. We both want to help all kinds of folks.
Hello, and welcome to My Sister's a Therapist. This is a show where a stand-up comedian and a therapist who are sisters talk to you. Here's my sister.
Hi, I'm Laura Ryan, licensed marriage and family therapist and sister to the stars, Virginia Jones.
Laura, what is our topic this week?
Our topic this week is, what is white culture? So, Virginia, what do you think white culture is?
You know, when I think of white culture, I think of a term that we used to use that we don't use anymore for a lower middle class upbringing that involves a lot of junk food. Our mother's Frito pie salad, which had, I think, 5 ingredients: Fritos, melted cheese whiz, iceberg lettuce, tomatoes, well, and taco meat, of course.
It was a classic, let's be honest. That was a banger.
It was a banger. Look,
in Donna's kitchen.
I've duplicated it as an adult.
Same.
There's just certain things that as I look at, I'm like, wow, that is really white. One of them is scrapbooking, riding a ATV. I think that honestly, planning weddings is a super white activity.
Mhm.
Anything about conspicuous consumption and junk food seems super white. There's just things that you say, wow, that's super white of us.
Consumerism, poor quality food, and a lot of attention to like memory creation, it seems like.
Right. Creating the cult of your own family and kind of worshiping at that cult. What do you think?
I mean, I think it's lots of things. I think it's mayonnaise. I think it's ugly sweater parties. I think
Oh,
it's
yeah. I hate that. Liking something because it's bad aggravates me a lot.
yeah. I think it's indie rock music.
That I
think
find hurtful.
I think it's record players.
I suggest you go talk to the Furious Five and Grandmaster Flash about that.
I think it's liking comic books. I was noticing that because I went to the pre-comic book day and it was wall-to-wall whites.
It is a pretty white activity. Swing dancing's pretty white activity.
Oh, 100%. So I was inspired to make this episode. It was actually Madonna that brought this episode to my mind. I was looking at pictures of my trip to Belize, which is extremely white to go to an island, take advantage of the local culture. But I was noticing in the tags on my phone that it was La Isla Bonita. And then I was thinking about Madonna. And because I have ADHD, I went on a rabbit hole and I was thinking about all the things Madonna has done that are co-opting other cultures. We have Vogue, which is, you know, the queer trans community, low SES BIPOC
Right.
community. It's not necessarily just Black, but BIPOC community in New York. Evita, the Argentinian population, Like a Prayer, which was really where I took pause. I remember thinking at the time the video came out, I mean, don't go watch it because you'll cry, but I remember thinking at the time, oh, she's so controversial. You know, she's doing sexual things in a church, but it's so white savior complex. It's so racist and it's just horrific. Madonna,
Papa don't preach. She's co-opting the experience of pregnant teens.
it's not really a cultural experience.
Justify My Love. She's co-opting the experience of sluts.
I think she was a firm member in that group. I think she did actually belong there. But yes. So what is white culture exactly?
Well, I mean, I think you make a good point. White culture is co-opting other cultures.
Yeah, pretending you made stuff up that you didn't and making it more palatable for white people. But like Elvis Presley, Justin Timberlake,
Right.
modern day Jack Harlow. It's all white people doing Black person impressions, and that's what white people are interested in.
Well, even things that you and I really like your Tom Waits. He's just doing an old bluesman.
So I was watching a TikTok video of all these BIPOC kids who are watching old videos and listening to old music. So they were listening to Michael McDonald.
He got sued by Holland Dozier because they had a song by a Black artist. I keep forgetting. Not in the same song.
Yeah.
Essentially the same song.
I was not aware of that, but you're doing an impression of a Black person.
Jim Croce.
I'm being faced with a lot of things these days. Well, I'm realizing, hey, I'm part of the problem.
Wolfman Jack.
Yeah, Tom Waits. I remember specifically because my father was a huge Michael McDonald fan.
Yeah.
And I turned him on to Tom Waits. And the way I did it was I just put a CD in the player. He didn't see the cover or anything like that. And that was one of our places where we bonded. And I remember maybe a year in or something, I don't know, he looked him up or something. He was like, wait, that's a white man?
Right.
He had no idea. Well, that's normal for a white guy from, the suburbs of California to sing in that format. That makes
Yeah.
sense. So there's an article in The Guardian called What is White Culture Exactly by Mona Chalabi. Anita Thomas, an associate professor of counseling psychology at Loyola University, said regarding Rachel Dolezal, in some ways it's normal, but not at her age. Many white adolescents behave similarly to Dolezal, attempting to take on what they perceive to be the characteristics of another race while exploring their own identities. Being, quote, the other, end quote, sure as hell has its downsides, but it turns out that not being the other does too, especially if you're a teenager. For white American youth who are disconnected from European heritage or legacy, it often feels like whiteness as a concept is empty. Thomas added in a quote that has really stuck with me. It seems to tie together some disparate thoughts I have had on white as an adjective. Rachel Dolezal was treated as if she were a bizarre outlier, but she's part of a much bigger pattern of white behavior. It includes Mesro. In the 1930s, this jazz musician declared himself a, quote, voluntary Negro, end quote, after marrying a black woman and selling marijuana. It includes the millions of white Americans who take DNA tests and proudly reveal that they are, in fact, X% non-white. This all ultimately finds that the concept of whiteness isn't empty. If white culture remains vague, then it can lay claim to every recipe, every garment, every idea that is not explicitly non-white. That would mean that my identity is just a sum, that my non-whiteness can only be understood as an abstraction from the totality of whiteness. I refuse to be a remainder.
Okay, so what we're saying is Rachel Dolezal, even though we acted like she was a freak, she was just one extreme of a spectrum of co-opting Black experience.
I mean, Justin Timberlake, he was a freaking Mouseketeer. And
Right.
then suddenly he's speaking in what would be termed a black scent
Yeah,
and making music that is not okay.
There are definitely comics, your Matt Rife, that talk in a black scent. It's very aggravating to me. I think the whitest thing you can do as a child is take a hip hop dance class, and there doesn't seem to be anything to
That
stop
any of
it.
us can do about it.
You cannot stop a girl from Kentucky taking a hip hop dance class. It just continues to happen.
Even one of my recent heroes, Ryan Gosling, was recorded performing hip hop dance as a 12-year-old. Not a cute look, Ryan. I think he may have made up for it since then. The way that I started to become aware of white culture was this website called Stuff White People Like. Do you remember this?
I do remember it.
So I'm going to read some of the camping. If you find yourself trapped in the middle of the woods without electricity, running water, or a car, you would likely describe that situation as a, quote, nightmare or a, quote, worst case scenario, like after a plane crash or something, end quote. White people refer to it as camping. When white people begin talking to you about camping, they will do their best to tell you that it's very easy and it allows them to escape the pressures and troubles of the urban lifestyle for a more natural, simplified, relaxing time. Nothing could be further from the truth. In theory, camping should be very inexpensive since you're literally sleeping on the ground. But as with everything in white culture, the more simple it appears, the more expensive it actually is.
I've always been curious about why we like to camp because I certainly don't. Evidently, it comes out of the German military and like kind of cosplaying a German military person in nature. That made a lot more sense to me, that we're just pretending to be soldiers, but you do it with your dad.
That's super weird. Here's another one from the Stuff White People Like book. White people are drawn to farmers markets like moths to a flame. In fact, white people have such strong instincts that if you release a white person into a random Saturday morning, they will return to you with a reusable bag full of fruits and vegetables. All white people are born with a singular mission in life in order to pass from regular whitehood into ultra whitehood. Just as Muslims have to visit Mecca, all white people must eventually renovate a house before they can be complete. White people love ethnic diversity, but only as it relates to restaurants.
You've hit me with a couple things pretty hard. I'm going to lay this on you. White people love organic food.
100,000%. I've fallen for it. The sad thing about Christian Lander's observations is that they are 100% accurate.
That's the hurtful part.
Okay, so this kind of ties into your swing dancing interests. One thing that white people like is historically black music that black people do not listen to anymore. Historically speaking, the music that white people have kept on life support for the longest period of time is jazz. Thanks largely to public radio, bookstores, and coffee shops, jazz has carved out a niche in white culture that is not yet ready to be replaced by indie.
You know, and speaking of Ryan Gosling in the film La La Land, he also taught Black people about jazz.
100%. That's why I didn't watch La La Land, because I was like, this is giving cringe so hard.
The parts of it are cringy, but it's very cute.
The biggest role that jazz plays in white culture is in the fantasy of leisure. All white people believe that they prefer listening to jazz over watching television. This is not true.
No, no one does that. When I was in college, I went to a college that was very well known for its jazz program and had a really strong musician population. The thing about jazz bows is that they're the main consumers of jazz. The people who play it are the people who listen to it. Just like there's more people who write poetry than read poetry, it's become a recursive act.
Absolutely. So every few months, a white person will put on some jazz and pour themselves a glass of wine or scotch and tell themselves how nice it is. Then they will get bored and watch television or write emails to other white people about how nice it was to listen to jazz. Quote, last night, I poured myself a glass of Shiraz and put on Charlie Baker on the Bows. It was so relaxing. I wish I had a fireplace, end quote. Listing this activity as one of your favorites is a surefire way to make progress towards a romantic relationship with a white person.
I've had a lot of questions and am uncomfortable with the degree to which Lindy Hop and swing dancing is by and for white people these days. The people who are the very best at it in the world, the people who study it, are Swedish. One of the biggest camps in the world is in Sweden. And whenever I see a person of color doing swing dancing, especially like a young queer one, I just want to give them $5. I'm like, yeah, stay with us. Come on.
Please stay. Please make this not feel like a mayonnaise factory every day.
Please make this not feel completely illegitimate every day.
Well, and also, I think it would make me feel a little gross. You're like, wow, all of these upper middle class white people have taken on this thing that historically Black poor people were doing. Along with jazz, white people have also taken quite a shine to the blues, an art form that captured the pain of the Black experience in America. Then in the 1960s, a bunch of British bands started playing their own versions of the music, and white people have been loving it ever since.
Yeah. The Black man impression that Mick Jagger has been doing for 60 years is super embarrassing.
It's super sus and embarrassing. I was also thinking about, you're talking about jazz. A fellow white at my college was telling me about how he was taking a jazz appreciation class where he had to sit down and spend hours of time in a classroom to learn to appreciate jazz. And I said, hey, if it doesn't come naturally, I think it's kind of weird that you feel like you have to take a class on it. If you have to learn how to appreciate a style of music and it doesn't naturally come to you, maybe it's because it's not for you.
I'm going to argue this and say sometimes because something is not dominant in the culture, you don't have the equipment to appreciate it. So I think there is validity in taking an appreciation course for an art form that you don't know very much about.
Well, I remember in another sus move, I took a class in college that was all about Blaxploitation, the films and books. And do you know how many Black people were in my class?
None people?
Correct. But again, why the hell was I taking that class?
Right.
Why am I learning about iceberg slim and how to make a pimp stick?
Here's something extremely white that I really like, and I've discussed it before, but free little libraries. I love a free little library.
That's white as it.
I am totally aware that it's white as F. Okay, ironic tattoos. I mean, tattoos in general.
Well, David Cross was recently making fun of hipsters and talking about tattoos of toasters on your arm, like a sleeve of
or a
toasters.
sewing machine or a vintage camera. I've often thought, like, well, there was that moment when mustaches.
I was going to say handlebar mustaches. That's the next one.
Yeah, mustaches tried to ruin the culture. And then people would get a mustache tattooed on their fingers so they could have an impromptu mustache. Now,
anytime I need it, got it right there.
I do think the first person to get a mustache tattooed on their finger was very clever. That's a funny joke. The second person to do it was a giant a-hole. And everybody after that
was a classic idiot. So what is whiteness, you may be wondering? According to Monnica Williams, Ph.D. in Psychology Today, the concept of whiteness was imported from Spain and Portugal during the slavery era, where whiteness was defined as a way to contrast one's identity as different from slaves. This was devised to create a deliberate hierarchy to define who was privileged, who was property, or a second-class citizen. While one can be proud of one's German heritage, French Canadian culture, American nationality, or African American ethnicity, one should not be proud of one's whiteness. Whiteness is a forced group membership that originated from oppressing people of color, and it causes psychological and spiritual damage to white people just as it damages non-whites. White Americans are imbued with whiteness from infancy. They do not choose it for themselves. People who look white and who have immigrated to America are generally afforded whiteness upon arrival, whether you want it or not.
You'll talk to an American, they'll make a huge distinction between a person from Spain and a person who's a Mexican American. Well, they both speak Spanish. There's the European one.
Right, because it's, again, this is all made up.
Right.
Ethnicity and culture are good things as long as they are built for the well-being of that group, but not race, which is defined by the dominant culture and imposed upon non-dominant groups. Why do we keep using the word Caucasian?
Crossword puzzles.
Crossword puzzles, Scrabble.
Yeah.
That's super white.
Yeah, bicycling long distances, bicycling as a vacation, taking your bike to work, beach biking, having a great big old-timey bicycle with a basket, having the first aluminum body bike used in the Tour de France. These are all super white people.
I think talking about Tour de France, talking about European football.
Oh, something I'm very self-conscious about as a white person is veganism and vegetarianism.
Oh, 100%. That is white AF.
When I started traveling a lot in Asia, I became aware of the level of white privilege of saying, I choose not to eat this kind of food.
I've decided for my own reasons.
Because I was going places where you just eat what you have and you're glad to have it. And
You're like, wait, you're turning down food?
Huh? What?
Huh?
Yeah, I choose not to eat this because I think where it comes from sucks. You know what else is super white? And I don't know what order we're going to release these episodes in, but talented and gifted programs are super
100%.
white.
That is white AF. So why do we keep using the term Caucasian? Yolanda Moses looked into that. The term Caucasian originated from a growing 18th century European science of racial classification. German anatomist Johann Blumenbach visited the Caucasus Mountains, located between the Caspian and Black Seas, and he must have been enchanted because he labeled the people there Caucasians and proposed that they were created in God's image as an ideal form of humanity.
Oh, my sweet Lord.
Yes. So his system of racial classification was adopted in the United States to justify racial discrimination, particularly slavery. Popular race science and evolutionary theories generally posited that there were separate races, that differences in behavior were tied to skin color, and that there were scientific ways to measure race. Blumenbach's category of Caucasian posed a problem because his classification of white also included some North Africans, Armenians, Persians, Arabs, and North Indians. The definition of Caucasian had to be reinvented to focus the ideological category of whiteness on Northern and Western Europe. The term, even though its exact definition changed over time, was used to shape legal policy and the nature of our society.
On the topic of like defining race, a lot of terms that are very uncomfortable: quadroon, octoroon, hexadecaroon, defining exactly how much of this perceived blackness was in a person.
Well, I mean, it's the whole colorism thing. Have you seen this dating show where you pop a balloon if you don't like somebody?
No.
So basically, a man will walk into a room and stand by the host of the show, and a bunch of women are standing there with balloons and just popping them. Maybe as soon as they see him, or
just like, nope,
this is not it. Right? I can't imagine having any shred of self-esteem after it's over. I was watching an episode of it. It was African American gentleman and a bunch of women of different races, and he specifically refused the attention of two very dark-skinned women. The host asked him,
"Hey, buddy, what's that about?"
Well, what's your reasoning for getting rid of them? Because they hadn't spoken yet. Like, it was literally just looking at them. And he made up some poppycock reason. Man, this is your internalized racism.
To circle back to a term that I just learned, hexadecaroon, someone who is 1/16 black, you and I would be hexadeca Italos if we considered Italian people to be non-white.
Italians used to be non-white. So there was a court case in 1923 that went to the Supreme Court, United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind. They decided that Bhagat was an Indian Sikh who identified himself as an Aryan, and he was ineligible for naturalized citizenship in the United States. He filed a petition for naturalization under the Naturalization Act of 1906, which allowed only, quote, free white persons, end quote, and persons of African descent to become United States citizens by naturalization. And it doesn't have the quote here in the Wikipedia article, but basically the judge said, well, although technically you meet criteria, what we consider Aryan or Caucasian is what the man on the street would consider.
It's the cultural definition. It's the what
Right.
it's like just visually what we look at and say, yeah, that person's a white person.
Which means that it's
You're-
fake.
Well, of course, it's all fake. All gender stuff is fake. All the stuff that we're super concerned about, high heels and wigs and lipstick, that was how Louis the Sun King dressed. And like anyone in his court would kick your butt. These are all made up things. And it's all to define yourself by what you're not.
Well, I think it's all to establish a hierarchy and keep certain groups in the hierarchy and others not.
The crap part about whiteness is that because of the domination of culture, things that are white are considered normal. Like, this is the normal way of doing things. Of course, I'm going to put my children in chess camp. Of course, I need to have a bilingual toddler. This is normal, and everything else is abnormal.
Right. Of course, the people that I hired to work as domestic laborers are not white. Okay, so in the book, The History of White People by Nell, Irvin, Painter, although science today denies race any standing as objective truth, and the U.S. Census faces taxonomic meltdown, many Americans cling to race as the unschooled cling to superstition. So long as racial discrimination remains a fact of life and statistics can be arranged to support racial difference, the American belief in races will endure. But confronted with the actually existing American population, its distribution of wealth, power, and beauty, the notion of American whiteness will continue to evolve as it has since the creation of the American Republic.
And this is something we observe growing up in the South, that the less an individual has going for them personally, the more ferociously they will cling to whiteness. Like, the more important that is. Because if you were happy with your life, if you were happy with your job, if you were happy with your family, if you were happy with your position in society, you would have other things to worry about than who your great 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 grandfather was.
Because I think it's about creating these fake structures
so that you can put yourself on top.
And I think that slavery created whiteness because I think that rich white people were noticing, oh, there's some poor whites who are getting close to Black people and there's more of them than us. And so we have to find a way to separate these groups. And so we're going to do it with whiteness. Did you know slavery comes from Slavic, the word Slavic, because those were the first slaves?
Enslaved people? Oh, wow. That is interesting. You know, the Greeks sometimes would get enslaved by people, but they would just call it Greekified.
Mostly Greek scholars focused on climate to explain human differences. Humors arising from each climate's relative humidity or aridness explained a group's temperament. Whereas the seasons do not change, people were labeled placid. Where seasons shift dramatically, their dispositions were said to display wildness, unsociability, and spirit. For frequent shocks to the mind impart wildness, destroying tameness and gentleness. Those words come from Hippocrates, air, water, and places.
If you were from the desert, you were fiery and passionate. If you were from near to the sea, you were pretty chilled. You were chilled out.
Right. You might as well to describe different types of people, or, you know, it makes about as much sense as saying a person who's a descendant of enslaved people is like this. I mean, it's just arbitrary nonsense.
It has been interesting as we become the most genetically sorted generation. There's a lot of stories of like, my family always identified as culturally Irish, and we would cry and talk about Catholicism and eat soda bread. And then when we did our workup, we're not Irish at all. It was just something that it was just an idea that somebody had. Like, oh, you know, we're passionate, we cry a lot, we're good at poetry, we're Irish.
We drink whiskey.
We drink, we cry, we love our mothers, we're Irish.
The problem is you say, okay, well, this is all made up, so who cares? But there are real stakes in it for people. You know, when we get into the statistics, I'm trying to avoid making an extremely depressing episode. I'm not going to get into the statistics, but, you know, if you're wondering if Black people are killed by the police at a higher rate in America, the answer is absolutely yes, by a lot.
I don't think anyone's wondering that.
Well, so somebody was living in a hole and they just got out. They just got their first iPhone because they don't even know what that is. And they decided this was their first
The
episode of
first
any
podcast,
podcast.
and it's going to be a series of shocks to the system. Welcome, welcome to society.
Sorry
Sorry about it.
for the tough entry, but that's just the way it is.
Mhm.
The 18th century created the now familiar equation that converts race to black and black to slave. Back to our friend Blumenbach. Remember that guy?
Good old
That
Blumenbach.
Caucasian man. Blumenbach labeled his prize skull. He had a prize skull, which is great because that was also part of the sciences, looking at people's skulls. And he labeled his prize skull beautiful and female Georgian, going on to call the human variety it inspired Caucasian. A mysterious slippage he didn't explain. Why not call it Georgian, we may ask, since the skull came from Georgia? The answer may lie in North America, where the newly formed U.S. already had a state called Georgia, and presumably people there were called Georgians. At any rate, during Blumenbach's time, the notion of Caucasian achieved wide circulation.
It doesn't matter what word you use. The important part is that you are making up a list of traits that are, quote, good, and a list that are more desirable, and a list of traits that are less desirable. And all of the 20th century, white people have been putting forth ideas like, oh, a skull from this part of the world will be more like this. Oh, a European's man, their beard will grow in this way that's different. We are always trying to define ourselves by what we are not and then elevate what we are.
Our group, yes.
Right.
I remember reading an article about the Catholic Protestant, we're going to go back to Ireland, the Catholic Protestant issues, right? Because Ireland for a long, long time didn't have many non-white people, but they did have
Leprechauns.
this huge divide, right? But they did have leprechauns. They've always had leprechauns. They still do, if anyone's wondering. Find out more about that in our luck episode. But
so they didn't have that many non-white.
Right. So they had to find some way to separate this group from that group. And so what happened was Catholic people were moved to a different area of town. There were fences built around areas. You couldn't walk in certain areas at night. Catholics, I think prior to the enslaved people, I think Catholics were the number one beefing group. People just did not like Catholics. And in early American history, there's a lot of stuff that was put up to keep Catholics out of the United States.
The Catholic versus Protestant versus, whomever. Now, a cultural idea is that Irish people stop being a minority through the police force.
Right. Creating public systems. That's where all the Irish people ended up.
And then
working for the government.
Yeah. And then when we elected John F. Kennedy, it was official. You could be Irish and still be a valued person.
And Catholic.
Have
you heard of Jane Elliott? The blue eye experiment?
Oh, I've heard of the blue eye experiment, but tell me about it.
So Jane Elliott was a teacher in an elementary school. It happened when MLK was murdered. She had this moment where she was like, this is a reckoning for the United States and we need to do something. So she started this experiment where she had children, I think it was for a week. She would separate the children in her class because I think she was in the Midwest. Everyone was white. She would separate them into the brown-eyed group and the blue-eyed group. And the blue-eyed group was treated like we treat racial minorities. I've seen interviews with the kids as adults, and they were like, it just made me think so differently about the world I live in, because these are arbitrary choices, but they really do have real consequences.
Well, and I read a thing about advertising, and especially advertising to children in the early days of Barbie and baby dolls, and they asked minority children, would you rather have a doll that looked like you or a white doll? And they all picked the white doll because they're like, that's
the good doll. I learned about racism in college where white people learn things. I mean, I knew about racism, obviously, but
we'd heard of it.
I'd heard of it, of course, but I didn't really understand the insidiousness of it and how it affects everything in a person's life. I watched Jane Elliott do a presentation where she was talking to a group of white people in a theater. It was a pretty big theater. And she said, now all of you guys are saying race doesn't matter. Who cares? Right. And she said, raise your hand right now if you would be happy to be treated the way that we treat Black Americans in this country. And guess what? Not a hand was raised. Right. So we all know it. It's insidious and it's hiding in the background.
It's like the man versus bear argument. Men know why a woman would choose the bear, but they want to pretend that they don't know. We know
Because it makes you feel
because
uncomfortable.
it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to say, I would not prefer to be a minority because I've seen how I and other people treat in the country.
Right, exactly. Caucasian is a racial terminology. Harkening back to Blumenbach, the term had more complex genealogy too, one connecting to its larger history of race, beauty, and reactionary politics. I remember when reading the history of white people, I found out that Caucasians were actually some of the first enslaved people, and people thought that they were the most beautiful. P.T. Barnum had two Caucasus women as things to look at in his original circus.
Beats working.
Yeah, they would sit on a bed and brush their hair,
I
and
could do that.
I could absolutely do that. Anyone wants to pay me to do that, I'm happy to do that. Virginia, have you heard of Ta-Nehisi Coates?
I haven't. Tell me all about him.
So Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote the book Between the World and Me. And in the book it says, but race is the child of racism, not the father. And the process of naming the people has never been a matter of genealogy or physiognomy, so much as one of hierarchy. Difference in hue and hair is old, but the belief in the preeminence of hue and hair, the notion that these factors can be correctly organizing a society, that they signify deeper attributes which are indelible. This is the new idea at the heart of these new people who have been brought up hopelessly, tragically, deceitfully to believe that they are white.
Well, it comes back to the same thing. It comes back to trying to separate people, assign us different tribes and different attributes. It's all BS and it's all made up. And it puts some people at a tremendous disadvantage and white people at a tremendous advantage. It's all horse S.
Right. Ta-Nehisi Coates also says Americans believe in the reality of race as a defined, indubitable feature of the natural world. Racism, the need to ascribe bone deep features to people and then humiliate, reduce, and destroy them, inevitably follows from this inalterable condition. People who believe themselves to be white are obsessed with the
Right.
politics of personal exoneration. Are you obsessed with the politics of personal exoneration?
Well, I think we've all come to this point where the true discomfort of whiteness is recognizing the privilege that it has afforded you and that you are part of the problem, even if you don't think you are.
What I have discovered is that I am benefiting from it, even though I'm not actively doing anything. I recently had an experience going out to a dance club that is not for white people.
Mhm.
And it was me and some friends, all white, and we were wearing crowns because it was my birthday and probably behaving obnoxiously. I've been to this place before, but there's been kind of a sea change, I think, recently. I think they're just tired of our stuff. We felt really unwelcomed. It was a very unusual feeling because
It was being presented to you that you were invading the space.
right. The woman up on stage was making comments about dumb white women, and a woman started pushing my friend, and we eventually we just had to leave. And they were both flabbergasted.
Yeah.
And I said, ladies, we are experiencing in a very minute, very small way something that every other group in this country experiences every day of their lives. We are being treated as other and we are being treated as we don't belong here. And it was unusual for all of us because
Right.
we're all privileged white ladies.
Yeah. And one, wearing crowns on your birthday, super white. Two, bachelorette parties.
Absolutely. Yes.
There's nothing more white than that.
I
But
think a gaggle of women screaming, there's nothing more white
oh
than
my
that.
Lord. Like the most white thing of all is feeling that you're going to be welcome in every environment inherently.
And believing that I have a right to be in every environment inherently.
Thinking that everyone has to make space for you.
What I was saying to my friends was, these folks have been dealing with white nonsense all day, probably all week, and this
Right.
is their weekend. And they're thinking, I'm not going to spend my free time accommodating white people anymore. It didn't feel good. I respect it.
Oddly, the only time that I've had that kind of experience, it happened after hours in a Russian bakery, and it was a dance club, and everybody in there was Russian, Ukrainian, Georgian, and they did not want us there, even though we were also white, but they could tell by the fact that our jeans were not bedazzled that we were not Russian. And you got to say, hey, this is your space. I get it.
Right. And I think it's very unusual for white people to, one, acknowledge that and two, respect it. One more quote from Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is from an article by Sarah Ruiz Grossman. Ta-Nehisi Coates breaks down why white people can't say the N-word in a rap song.
Thank you. It needs to be said.
It needs to be said. White privilege, or white people being raised in a society whose laws and culture communicate to them that, quote, everything belongs to you, end quote, as Coates puts it, makes some white people feel as though they have a right to do anything, including using a word that they have been repeatedly told is inappropriate for them to use. Quote, for white people, I think the experience of being a hip hop fan and not being able to use the word N will be very insightful, Coates concluded. This will give you just a little peek into the world of what it means to be Black, because to be Black is to walk through the world and watch people doing things that you cannot do, end quote.
That is interesting. When I was coming up in Portland comedy, my friend Nathan is very funny, Black comic. He had this bizarre experience where at some point or another, every white dude in our scene asked him if they could say the N word. Are you asking me if me, someone who knows you, will be offended if you use the N word in front of me? No, but that doesn't mean anything about the rest of the, like, I'm not giving you a superpower. This
Right.
doesn't mean you're not going to be offending people. This doesn't mean you're not going to get your butt kicked. This is not a gift I can give to you.
Well, because it's the idea that a racial group is a monolith. I remember, again, I'm a white lady, so this doesn't happen to me much, but I remember living in the UK when George Bush was president. I would not speak to people because I didn't want people to hear that I was American and have them start accosting me about George Bush. But
Right. Like, I can't control it, you guys.
Every group that I went into, I had to justify American politics, and it was exhausting. And that was just a tiny little nothing of life.
But let me also say, just in general, if you're a white guy and you have a Black wife, you're not Black. If you're a white guy who's friends with Black guys, you are not Black. Proximity does
not make you belong. I mean,
it does
just
not
like
give you
that
what you
jazz
deserve.
musician who dealt
Right.
marijuana and married a Black woman, you're not a part of that group. You
'Cause
don't
you haven't had
understand
the
the culture,
experience.
you're not a part of it, and you don't have to deal with it every day. I think that's the other big difference. I'm reading this book by Madeline Pendleton. She was talking about how she was trying to get a job and she was going for a more lucrative job, kind of a fancier job. And so she took out her nose ring, she dyed her hair brown, and she wore clothing to cover her tattoos because she could pretend and be accepted. Right, she could pass. But if you're a Black person, you can't just take out your nose ring. You're that all the time. And so you just have to deal with that all the time. You don't get to decide when you're going to be in the accepted group and when you're not.
I was talking to 2 comics, women of color yesterday, but we were talking about the very aggravating thing for them of being in front of industry and being told to be more Asian, be more Dominican, be more Black for the amusement of white people. Like, that's the product that we want from minority performers.
We want racial stereotypes to be upfront.
We want to have our beliefs confirmed. And like every minority comic, if you do an exaggerated impression of your mother, that's just like printing money. And we put it on them. It's very frustrating and it's aggravating. And I think the whitest thing of all is
What do you think is the whitest thing of all?
having this conversation.
I think you're correct. There was an interview that I saw with Jake Johnson from New Girl and Hannah Simone. She is also from New Girl, but he was asking her, what was it like for you to get this job? And she said, well, I had stopped acting for years and years because they kept asking me to play South Asian stereotype characters. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be a person. And she said, this was the first job where they just told me I could be a person. I didn't even have to talk about my race on the show.
I'm an American and this is what I look like. And here's where I am.
Virginia, what are your closing thoughts on this super fun topic?
Well, I think it's never a bad idea to examine why you think the things about yourself that you do, what you cling to. I'm not going to be ashamed of my love of tap dancing and comic books and indie rock music, but I'm aware of the particular space it occupies in the culture. Laura, what are your final thoughts?
I just think it's such a complicated issue. As I was doing the research for this episode, I could make this 15 episodes because there's so much here. I think all white people listen to Black people, listen to people from other groups, read, learn stuff, and just try in your own corner, just try to make the world a better place for the people around you.
You know, it's also super white.
Saying your own corner.
And telling people to read stuff.
Go to your local library after you've heard about it on your local community radio station.
Laura, where can people find you online should they choose to?
They can find me at lauraryan.org. They can also find me on TikTok at I am Laura Ryan, or they can check out the show's Instagram account at My Sister's a Therapist. Virginia, where can people find you?
You can find me at badinia.com, BADINIA. That's also my TikTok and my Instagram. The message that I want to give everybody listening to this right now, giving 5 stars is great. That's fantastic.
We love that.
But we need your words because we want to read it.
Virginia, how do people reach out to the show if they want to contact us?
If you want to talk to us, you can write us at hello@mysistersatherapist.com. We are happy to receive feedback, show ideas, compliments, any kind of Starbucks gift cards that you can send by email.
And if you'd like to hire us to speak at your women's conference, mental health conference, women's leadership event, wellness event, women's retreat, educational seminar, corporate retreat, or workshop, you can write us at hireuss@mysistersatherapist.com. You can also go to mysistersatherapist.com to find all the episodes of this show.
And Laura, this is the part of the show where we read a review. Do you have a review to share with us this week?
I certainly do. This one is called Funny and Informative. The user is called
Thank you.
Virginia and Laura keep me interested and laughing throughout this pod. Love all the different topics. Thank you.
See, that was short and sweet, but we really appreciated it. In closing, I want to remind us all of the cultural icon, Billy Ray Valentine, Capricorn.
My personal hero,
and someone we think about every day when he said, "We can make it, baby."
me and you. Bye-bye.
Bye.